I've gotten tired of sanding in this project, so I paid double the hardware store price for spar varnish for high gloss marine varnish from Total Boat, because you can overcoat this thing. It says in 1 hour, maybe it's going to be closer to 2 hours depending on humidity and temperature, but you can overcoat without sanding if you do it within 48 hours. So they say you can get 5 coats or so in a day. So I'm looking forward to finishing this thing off in a day. We'll see how that works. I bought the 48 pack of foam brushes, because you can always need foam brushes. I got the thinning agent, even though I'm not going over wood, I'm going over epoxy, and so it doesn't look like I'll actually need to thin it, since I'm not spraying it or trying to penetrate wood with it. So I may not end up needing to use this. If I'm only using disposable foam, I'm not going to be trying to clean my brushes. I did buy the fancy brush, though, in case I don't like the result with the foam. I can try tipping it with a brush as opposed to tipping it with the foam. So I got the 48 pack of foam brushes, and these things are 90 bucks right there. But they sent me all kinds of free stuff. So I got, the filters, and two more of the brushes. Even though I bought the 48 pack, they just threw in 2 for free. They gave me some stir sticks, which is nice to have a stir stick to make sure it's stirred. And their mixing cups. So I think I might be paying for the premium stuff, because they're giving me all this expensive stuff as like free gifts. But if it works, it works. We're going to see how it goes. I'm going to try varnishing these guys vertically, and if that works, I can do both sides at once. Remember when I said I wasn't going to maybe need to use this stuff? I just realized these guys are bare wood, so for these guys I'm going to have to thin the first couple of coats down, basically 1-to-1, equal amounts, to penetrate the wood. So what I'm going to do is varnish this guy with some, and then thin the rest down, equal parts, to hit these guys, at least for my first 2 to 3 coats. This is dangerous stuff. Rags, anything coated with it, need to be kept in a metal container full of water when you're done, otherwise they may spontaneously burst into flames. So, you want to be careful with this stuff, extremely flammable. I want to point out this is the first time I've ever used varnish, and you should not be doing what I'm doing here. Varnish is hard to apply. I'd watched a few YouTube videos and they made it look easy, but it's really not. I had to watch several more YouTube videos, and I really wasn't very good at it until almost my last coats. Alright, I'm thinning this 50-50 for use penetrating the wood. So I think I'm going to do 20 milliliters. Here. And I just need something to pour this into so I don't contaminate, or maybe, since it's thinner, I don't care that much. So that is 10 of the thinner and 20 of the lacquer. My goodness, that is thin. I'm not going to do 50-50. That's ridiculously thin. So this is 2-to-1 thinning here. That's 25% thinner, 33% thinner, I guess. I'm not sure how well hanging vertically is going to work with unthinned varnish here. I can see some lines going back and forth. So I may have to let this dry and sand it out, and I may have to varnish this guy horizontally. Now with the thin varnish, where I'm just penetrating the wood for now, these guys look nice. It's just like a wood stain. So I might try thinning this varnish down with 5% just to make it flow a little better and see how that works on a vertical surface. It's been an hour. These guys are pretty smooth, not tacky. This guy, I can see visible lines where I drag the foam brush sideways, but they've gone down a bit from where they were an hour ago, and it's also not tacky. So I'm going to overcoat this sucker. We're going to do 2 or 3 coats of varnish on the rudder, and then 2 or 3 coats of thinned varnish on the wood. and then I'm going to reevaluate after that. I might need to come back and sand down and start coating the rudder horizontally, but we're just going to go for it and see how things work out. So here I'm using smoothing techniques that are better suited for epoxy than varnish. In varnish, you really want to be going in one direction, working in smaller areas towards the wet all the time. And what I'm doing is contributing to the lines I'm seeing later. Because my tiller and tiller extension were narrower than my foam brush, I was doing good techniques here just by wiping the brush all the way down it. So I had better outcomes on the tiller and tiller extension right off the bat. Alright, second coat is set up and there is definite wavy lines going across that thing. So I'm going to do another coat this way, and then I'm going to just let it dry for a day or two. And I'm going to sand it down flat. Now these guys with the thinned lacquer are working really well. So as long as this lacquer is thinned, I'm going to keep these guys vertical, because the vertical application lets me get both sides at once. These guys are going to be hard on paint points to keep from flipping around anyways because they're so thin. So vertical application works well with thinned lacquer. Doesn't seem to work super great with full thickness lacquer. My technique is almost inadvertently getting better here with these long vertical strokes downward. Alright, I was at the hardware store, so I got stainless steel versions of these 1/4 inch lock washers, and fender washers to go with. This appears to be stainless steel, all the rust on it's from the washers. So now I have stainless steel hardware. So this happened. Apparently my wire had gotten a little bit loose, and putting it on and off, at one point the wire wasn't bent enough and it slipped off and fell about 5 feet and hit the concrete floor. So that's how much damage you get with a mahogany rudder coated in fiberglass when it slams into a concrete floor under its own weight from 5 feet, which isn't too bad all in all, but I'm going to have to file this whole bit off and down. If this wasn't a sailing dinghy, if it was going to be in the water all the time, I'd have to re-epoxy that, I think. But since it is, I'm just going to file it down and then we're going to just varnish over it, because, I mean, this thing goes in the water for a couple hours at a time and then it sits out for a week, so I'm not too worried about water ingress, especially in the mahogany. Alright, hit that guy with a file. It's mostly smooth again. With respect to the varnish, you know, it's nice and glossy, but I can see definite lines going back and forth here. So I'm going to sand this whole thing down with 320 grit sandpaper, and then I'm going to put it on the paint points and do one side at a time, and hope that improves my flow. Maybe I just need to work on my tipping technique, but see if that works any better. If that doesn't work, I'm going to start thinning the varnish just a little bit and see if that helps. So it gets real easy to see these wavy lines once I hit this with the 320 sandpaper just a little bit. So I'm going to have to sand this down until it's flat, and then we'll do some more varnishing. Well, in the process of sanding, I found a little hole in here, so I think I am going to delay a day and cover this with epoxy. I'm going to try putting a little bit of this milled fiberglass into it. As long as it wets out clear, I'll put that in here. Otherwise, I'll just use epoxy resin on its own, because I don't want, like the glass micro balloons, I know they are just stay white. I don't want a white speck in there. So I'm going to try the milled fiber, and if it wets out clear, I'll use that in here. Otherwise, I'll just use plain old resin. Alright, I'm happy to report that the milled fiber does wet out mostly clear there. Not sure if those are mostly air bubbles or milled fiber that's giving it slightly whitish tint to there. So now I'm trying to get it on the wood and in that hole, and hopefully without making a big mess. I really don't need much at all. Just filling in the hole and maybe coating the wood. Since I have epoxy here, I might as well coat. This is an application where having fast hardener might have been useful, because now I have to wait probably another day. This epoxy is cured. I sanded it with 220 sandpaper. I cleaned the whole thing off with, I use 91% alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, let it evaporate, and now it's ready to put some lacquer on. Now I've been having problems getting this lacquer to flow correctly and tip. Maybe my tipping technique is just bad. But I've been having problems doing straight lacquer, so I've pretty much been having to thin this down about 10% with a thinner. I found that the single-use syringes are really useful here. Boy, this one's really tight. I found that the single-use syringes are really useful for measuring this stuff out in small quantities like I'm doing here. And you can even keep reusing these guys as long as you also put the thinner through the syringe, as opposed to having two syringes. Purists might have two syringes, one for the lacquer, one for the thinner. But then your lacquer syringe is going to get all stuck up eventually. So I'm doing 20 milliliters, trying to get most of the lacquer off the end of the syringe before I stick it in my solvent. And then 2 milliliters, so you know that's 10% there. And then by having that solvent go through here, it's getting a little sticky. Eventually you're going to have to replace this, throw it out. But you can get a day or two, 3 or 4 coats out of that thing. I'm just mixing this thing in random containers. This is a container from mushrooms. So this is a container from a yogurt. So if I eat another yogurt before my 3rd coat, I'll have 3 containers for today. My technique is getting a little better here, mostly because I'm only doing one surface at a time, and so I'm doing less surface area. I'm laying new varnish down sideways, but I'm least connecting the wet edges. And then at the end, I'm tipping all the way across a relatively small area all in one direction. So I'm not actually cleaning anything with the special brushing thinner, but I am mixing a little bit of that solvent in. So I'm keeping all my old used brushes and containers out here on a piece of concrete and some bricks well away from anything. So if they were to catch on fire, they just burn themselves out. That coat looks pretty good after drying for an hour and a half. You can still see lines going this way where I tipped it, but they're not terribly pronounced. So for my next coat, I'm going to be putting the putting the varnish on going this way, and then I'll be tipping it going that way. And for my final coat, I'll reverse it again. My second coat definitely had more visible brush strokes. Had an issue down here where it didn't flow all the way down, or I didn't wipe along it correctly. So we have a little bit off there on the edge. We have definite visible brush strokes here. So maybe it has to do with heat. Maybe I should be using more thinner the warmer the day gets, because the first coat was not super hot, but you know, 75 degrees or so. The second coat was probably 80. This one here will be about 83, 84. I did 3 coats of varnish. Well, this was hanging vertically on both sides. Then I sanded it down, and then I did horizontally 3 coats on each side. I did all that in one day because I can overcoat every hour or two. And it comes out pretty good. I'm not 100% happy with it. There are some lines where I tipped going this way on my last application. I can see a couple of those lines, and they're especially evident along the edge here. You can see brush lines, or in this case foam brush lines, going over the edge like it was grabbing or hanging, even though the surface below was not tacky anymore. It had been well more than an hour and it wasn't tacky. My first coat went on the best. When I had it sanded down with 320, and then I put the first coat on, that seemed to work the best. And the subsequent 2 coats actually I had some issues with, like kind of when I was tipping it, I could see it kind of drag and make lines, and it didn't flow out entirely. Also, of course, when I did this side, I was a little heavy, and so I got some varnish drops on the back. So I'm definitely going to have to sand the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand the whole thing down again, and I'm going to put 1 more coat on each side, and I'm going to break out the fancy brush just in case the problem is with my foam brushes. People online say foam brushes work just as well for them, but I paid $10 for the fancy brush. I'm going to break it out and try it with the fancy brush. I'm probably going to, instead of like 5%, I'm going to go to the full 10 or 15% of thinning, try to make it flow really well. And really what I'm doing is, the sand I just have knocked down these guys, but really I'm trying to get a really smooth surface and do the 1 coat, and I'm hoping that'll look really good. Obviously, this may not matter because I have enough problems with my fiberglass work and other things where, the a little bit of lines at the edge and so forth may not be a big deal on the varnish. But I'm trying to learn how to do this really well in case I ever really do something I care about. So I'm just not happy with how it's coming out so far. Now, on the other hand, the ash for the tiller extension and the tiller, I just hung these guys up, and I did them vertically. I did like 6 layers vertically. I have, like a tiny little drop somewhere. Well, maybe I can't find it now. There's a tiny little drop kind of there. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with this guy. This guy here has some, indentations and stuff, and there's a little bit here. I have like kind of drop edge here and there, but for just hanging these up and doing them, and there's a little drop there. But all in all, there's a little drip there. These actually came out pretty darn nice. I'm pretty happy with them. Obviously, they have a couple little flaws here and there, but I think I'm a lot happier with these guys than the rudder. And on the plus side, my son's doing his rain gutter regatta boat, and since I had the varnish out, I put some layers on this anytime I do the rudder, and I didn't really care about getting some on the plastic, but looks pretty nice for that. So hey, at least he has a really nice covering on the bottom of his rain gutter regatta boat. Using the bristled brush held more varnish, and it mostly got rid of the brush strokes I was having show up with the foam brushes. However, I still have a lot of little divots or pot marks where the varnish has like a depression, a little tiny depression in it, which I think have something to do with individual bristles on the brush. And it didn't improve my varnishing technique. Apparently I skipped this little section here. There's some lines with no varnish, like almost gashes in the varnish, except it's not gash, it's just apparently when I went over it I wasn't putting enough varnish down that it actually filled in the whole area, which kind of surprised me because I thought I was putting the varnish on pretty darn thick. So not super happy with it yet, but it does provide UV protection, which is all I really need it for. So I'm going to sand this bit of varnish that got around the edge on the other side. I'm going to do this whole side at 320, and then I'm going to varnish this side. And because I've already sanded this whole thing, I'm just doing these edges where the varnish came around and where maybe it dripped out of the holes. I'm going to be trying to do this by hand with a hard block, and see how that goes. If that doesn't work well, I'll switch over to the full mechanical sander. Every night I'd watch a new YouTube video about how to varnish, and I feel like my technique here is getting almost okay. Making little small strokes to fill in the area and put more and more varnish down, always going towards the wet edge, and kind of tipping across as much as I can in long strokes. So this last bit seemed to work pretty well for me. That seemed to go pretty well. I mixed it 10% by volume of thinner, and it seemed to flow pretty well. I didn't notice any brush marks right away that I've left behind. I caught a spot that I'd left and I recovered it. There's a lot of little dots in the varnish, and I don't know what's causing them. I don't think it's dirt or dust. The brush is, coming new out of a new box. I had the same type of thing with the bristle brush. At least I'm not getting brush marks too badly. There's a couple maybe sideways marks where I was doing different, I did a section, did a section, did a section, but most of those seem to be flowing out. So I feel like when I did my last coat of varnish, I was really starting to learn and know what to do. There's a lot of little tiny pot marks on it. Maybe they're dust. I'm not exactly in a dust-free environment here, but you can see these tiny little specks in it. And they look like little depressions. Also, I do a section of varnish, and then I do another section of varnish, and I tip through them. And if you look really carefully and know what you're looking for, you can kind of see, there's division there and a division there, kind of a division here. And if you look down it, you can see a little bit of waviness going crosswise mostly. But all in all, it looks very nice, and it's good enough for me. I think the takeaway message here is that I had enough imperfections in my fiberglass and epoxy work anyways that the varnish isn't going to make it better, so the varnish might have been extra work for nothing. I think if I were to do this project again, I would use some spray yarn or wipe yarn urethane. Really, I was just looking to get the UV protection here. I wanted to do varnish because people typically put varnish on top of fiberglass, on top of wood, and I wanted to make it look nice and practice and learn how to do that. But in my opinion, the varnish is a lot of work for just a little bit of visual gain. And my particular piece was already visually compromised before I started the varnish, especially on this side. You can see there's some spots in the fiberglass underneath. So it looks nice. I'm glad it's done. But if I were to do it again, I think I would just use a urethane on top of the fiberglass. Now, I am very happy with how the varnish worked on the tiller and the tiller extension. I thinned 50% the first couple coats to penetrate the wood, and then just did the rest of them, just thinned a tiny little bit, the same amount as on the rudder. I only had to sand out a run on one of these guys once or twice, and you know, it worked really well. So I'm pretty happy with how it went on. Later on, watching some more how to varnish YouTube videos, somebody mentioned that, well, you know, varnish does, you know, if you hold it with your hands and are working with it a lot, it's going to get you know, smudged, and you're going to have to reapply frequently for areas that, you know, people walk on, or that you are, you know, moving around with your hand a lot. So maybe a urethane would have been better for at least the extension on the tiller. But if that happens, it's pretty easy to sand off and put something else on top. So we're going to put this thing together and see how it holds up. This is my pile of disposable plastic containers and foam brushes from varnishing. This isn't even all of them. This is just the set since the last time I took the trash out. Alright, so my 1/4-inch bolts fit in those holes, and my spring tension post fits in this hole. It's firm enough to mostly hold it in place until the springs get on, but it's not sticking in super well. So the problem with refinishing something nice is that then you start looking at the hardware you're going to be putting back on these things. And the outside wasn't too bad. It had maybe a little bit of varnish around the edge, but the inside's really ugly, and I don't want that touching my nice new varnished rudder, or even my varnished tiller here. So I'm going to try cleaning this up a little bit. We're going to start on the inside to see how sandpaper looks on the aluminum when I get done, and if I like how it looks, I'll do it on the outside as well. Alright, there's a job that requires your safety goggles. Alright, the wire wheel did a good job on the edges. I'm going to leave the inside flats just a little bit burnished here, just so I know which side's the inside. And now it's time to work on the outside. Alright, you can see that there's definitely lower spots in the center for some reason. I would have kind of expected the low spots to be on the edges. I hit those with the little tiny bit on the side here to get into the center edge a little bit. And I think that's good enough. I might hit that just a little bit more there, but they're basically ready to be put on. Okay. Have the screws. Take a number 2 Phillips, and the nuts, which I found a 3/8 works well for. And we're going to put these things through. At least I think we are. I'm going to be using a little thread locker here because it's kind of annoying to have a nut fall off somewhere. Although before I put that on, let's dry fit these guys and make sure I haven't screwed up the thread so badly I can't get nuts on them. Alright, we have a tiller. Alright, I'm going to put this side of the tiller extension against the tiller because it's obviously the side that was against it before, and this side looks nicer. I'm going to put this washer in the middle. It's stainless steel. These guys replaced the rusty hardware that was on there. I'm pretty sure they're not factory. I don't know if they used a lock washer from the factory, but since that's what was on there before, we'll assume that the person who put rustable hardware in is copying what they thought should be in there from the factory, maybe? We'll see. Whatever. It'll work. Or will it? Have to screw that through the varnish. Yeah, at least the interior of the hole is coated. Alright, I completely lost my 7/16 wrench that I was using to disassemble this only 14 days ago. So, we're using the 11mm up here, and I have an adjustable wrench later on. Now this guy sticks out an awful lot for this nut, but we're going to deal with it. I'll have to watch and make sure that does not start scraping the fiberglass top deck of the sailing dinghy. Yeah, that definitely needs thread locker there. I think that could be a little tighter. Alright, that rotates, but doesn't wiggle. I don't like how far that sticks out. Maybe it's well above the deck of the boat. Maybe it's not going to be an issue. I don't have any acorn nuts in my cabinet right now, but I'm going to take a close look at how close it gets to the deck of the boat. And if it gets anywhere near close, I'm going to put an acorn nut over the end of that thing to kind of put a rounded surface on the bottom. So I scraped and sanded this a little bit, but you know, it's just not quite as shiny as those brackets from the tiller, and it's going to be sitting right behind them. So alright, I spent a lot of time polishing this thing. I'm not sure it's getting that much better. It's a cast part, so I can't really get into those little bits down there. And realistically, I think what I really need to do is either sand it, or maybe sandblast it would be the right solution for this part. I'm not sure if I'm willing to buy a soda blaster just to make this guy look a little nicer. Alright. Just got this cheap Amazon Basics sandblaster and soda blasted this guy, and it's gotten a little bit better. It's about as good as it's going to get. We're going to reassemble this guy. Okay, to get this little split ring in place, it's really, really nice to have one of these split ring pliers and to have the right attachment that'll fit in those tiny, tiny little holes in there. So I just have to remove the current ones that are too big and put in the super tiny ones, and we will be able to install that, hopefully, without a lot of cursing. This little retaining ring is a 3/8 inch external retaining ring, and it helps a lot if you have one of these pair of pliers just to squeeze it out just enough to get it over whatever you're putting it on. And you basically get the plier heads in the holes, you can squeeze it out, slide it along, get it to where it needs to be, and it locks on exceptionally well. Now the tricky bit, that's real easy to do when there's no spring on this, the tricky bit is doing it when it's in the cheek assembly with the spring putting tension on it. last assembly step, putting the tiller on the rudder. Now, seeing as how I have the nut on that side, I suppose I should be consistent. Now, this guy didn't have any washers here. It just had the washers underneath. So, let us see about getting this washer in place. Then we just have to flip it over without losing the bolt. Get this guy in place. Well, that's nice. It's actually small enough I can fit it on there. Alright, just a matter of wrenching. Alright, I'm using an 11 because I don't have two 7/16. I don't want to get that too tight because I want to be able to swivel. Same deal on this guy, although it can be a little bit tighter because we want the cheek to be making relatively firm contact. Now, one thing I don't understand about the sunfish rudders is it'd be nice if this thing could somehow fold flat, and so you could lay it down flat that way, but it doesn't. I could swear my Banshee rudder does that. I'll have to go check. Could swear the tiller would fold all the way around and fold flat. Alright, that took significantly longer than I was planning on, but it looks a lot nicer than I was planning on when I started. Okay, this guy in the front is my sunfish rudder with fiberglass and varnish. The guy over there is the sunfish dagger board that I think is just mahogany with varnish. I have untouched by me, and you can basically see what they look like in the sun. Let me try doing it with the shade. Alright, so here's in the shade the difference between these two guys. I'd like to point out the rudder was in worse shape than the dagger board when I got it. But as you can see, it has a very similar visual appearance. But that's the final result there compared to something else from the same boat. Is this a drain plug?